A top story this half hour, the PIC has joined forces with trade union, the PSA, to institute an international class action lawsuit against global retailer Steinhoff. The trade union says the lawsuit aims to recoup over 17 billion rand of pensioners' money lost due to the fall in Steinhoff's share price. This followed the global retailer admitting to accounting irregularities and his former CEO, Marcus Jooste, resigning in December last year. The PIC, which is one of Steinhoff's biggest shareholders, was hardest hit following the drop in share price.
These accounting irregularities it's a sort of a toned-down expression of maladministration and corruption. And we believe that that kind of wrongdoing necessitates or gives us the ability to be able to have a lawsuit whereupon we can be able to take civil and criminal action against Steinhoff, its directors, and all its prescribed officers, those who are still in employment there and those who have already left, people like Marcus Jooste in their personal capacities. So we are really working hard to build that prima facie case, which will be the basis in which PIC has already indicated that once that is in place, they will certainly join in making sure that we recoup the lost investments.
And let's take a look at what class action lawsuits can achieve. While class actions allow individuals to bring a civil lawsuit as a collective, and it allows groups to amplify their ability to litigate, negotiate and settle disputes. And the outcome of the lawsuit binds all members, present or absent. And class actions also saves resources of both the courts and the participating parties. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and embattled former Steinhoff executives are stoking a storm after reportedly selling off assets to keep themselves afloat. Marcus Jooste, the Steinhoff CEO who stepped down in disgrace in December, has started selling some of his prized racehorses. And Jooste is believed to own scores of properties around the Cape Town area. However, the Cape High Court in February will hear an ABSA application to liquidate Jooste's racehorse company Mayfair. Mayfair speculators, ABSA seeks to recuperate 266 million rand in an overdraft facility and bank guarantees granted to Mayfair. And former Steinhoff chair Christo Visi has already sold over R1 billion in Shoprite shares to offset his losses. And the global retailer has since put up €1 billion in non-core assets for sale. And Steinhoff Africa has also advertised its $25 million Gulfstream jet for sale. And we're joined in studio by Zanele Lwane, Deputy President of Black First, the Land First movement. We have Yamkela Spengane, Black Consciousness political activist. You're at home, do join us on social media at AN7TV on Twitter. Good evening to you and thanks so much for your time. What can we make out of this? And I mean, if it's not a sign of liability, or rather trying to protect their own interests, in the case of Marcus Jooste and Christo Visi shedding off their assets, what do you make out of it, Zanele?
So I think it's very important to just put it out there that agents of white monopoly capital, such as Christo Visi, are doing exactly what they have been doing for centuries in terms of running businesses and stealing wealth from the black majority in this country. And as Black First, Land First, we still maintain the position that the greatest, or rather the fundamental act of corruption in this country is land dispossession, which comes with the white mafia gang monopolizing all sectors of the economy, right? And we have seen that the jet is on sale, and they've even sold land to try and rebuild, the stature of Steinhoff, which is obviously corrupt in so many ways. And I think it's very important to put it out there to say they are already sitting on stolen land, and they are selling land that belongs to black people, and to send a clear message that whoever is going to buy that land, they must know very clearly that they are buying stolen property, and they will eventually face the rage of black people in this country. But also, so Steenhoff is obviously implicated in corrupt misconduct, money laundering, and all kinds of things, right? And we have the Gupta family, for example, which was never given an opportunity to even present their side of the story. Their accounts were frozen. They've faced all kinds of humiliation, the public courts and everything. And here you have Steenhoff, which is obviously corrupt. The corrupt criminal organizations, such as the banks in South Africa, they have not frozen their account. They are still continuing with business as usual. Why? Because we know from the courts all the way to how business is run in South Africa, it's designed to absolve and to sugarcoat the corruption of white monopoly capital in this country, while prosecuting the president of the country, while prosecuting black managers, black business people, to continue to keep the means of production in white hands and keep black people at the margins of the economy.
Is it maybe a good time now to look at corruption, as you are saying, as a more broader systemic problem and not just leave it squarely to government or particular individuals, that this is now a sign of the times changing, that people are no longer going to, especially where investment of public employees are concerned, that it is time to take to task those big multinationals and conglomerates?
Well, we have to look at it this way. We've always been of the view that corruption does not start with the ANC. In fact, the ANC learned corruption from Kotesa. You remember that in the first democratic government, ministers were from the ANC, deputy ministers were from the former National Party, so-called transition period of handing over government issues. And in that infrastructure of governance alone, it was problematic. But the problem is that we went and separated public sector and private sector corruption, of which we've always said that private sector is the most corrupt and the most underreported corruption activities actually happen in the private sector. For instance, illicit financial flows in this country, which means participation of private sector companies and individuals that take money out of South Africa illegally, evading tax, is to the worth of about 350 billion rand a year. Now, that is almost 35% of the entire fiscus collection of SARS that we are missing, that is going out. And now we are seeing again Steenhoff going back. It has defrauded PIC of 17 billion rand. That means it has defrauded ordinary government workers of 17 billion rand. That is corruption. That is stealing from the state. And now we have a case where the media is underplaying this particular issue. The report actually, and the intensity to which, for instance, the Guptas were given when they were accused of corruption, is not seen in the media. The so-called gatherings that happen of journalists and so forth discussing this particular Steenhoff issue, where people for a period of 15 years have continued to defraud people with unsecured lending, going into poor people and actually giving them unsecured credit that they could not afford and making a killing out of it that is unsustainable, and then defrauding the government with unlawful, because number one, when you have balance sheets, when you have accounting statements, they are government by international reporting standards. You have IFRS that actually governs that, and it goes hand in hand with all the regulatory laws. Now, people, when they violated international regulatory laws, they defrauded the government. That, of course, in itself constitutes fraudulent activity. And someone somewhere, including the MPA, must have actually put a pause to this, frozen Steenhoff accounts, and investigated what is going on. Without Steenhoff still trading in the JSE, without them being allowed to sell off things, because God knows what they are going to sell, and next thing we won't be able to recover some of the money that they've actually blown away that is in the public interest. And we are saying that it is a particular time now that we deal with corruption in the same way, both in private and the public sector.
Yeah, but what is the role of the Public Investment Corporation, that is the custodian of government pension funds, in the responsibility that they also ought to take? If you're saying these kind of shenanigans have been taking place and cooking the books and reflecting certain profits that are non-existent, where was the PIC?
I think it's very important to say the PIC, as we know it today, is clearly in cahoots with white monopoly capital. And we know that a majority of their investments is in white-owned businesses who practice corruption on a daily basis as a norm, including Steinhoff. So sending a clear message to the PIC, I think it's very important to say that the people the money that you are handling belongs to black people. But this money is not reinvested in any way to change the lived experience of black people. You take it to Johan Rupert, you take it to Marcus Joste, you take it to Christo VC of ShopRite, who own the most exploitive businesses as we know it today. So PIC must take responsibility for putting the monies of black people at risk and to put black people and their investments at risk. And one of, I would say, one of the first actions they would have to take, at least to show remorse, is to withdraw lots of money. We're talking about billions of money that they continue to invest in white-owned companies, and find arenas within black businesses where that money could be invested and the returns of that could go back to the black community.
But is that going to take a policy reform? Because obviously the application of wrongdoing or administration of punitive measures is different from what you see in government and the public sector. For example, in government, you'd be expected to either resign or you'd be subjected to an inquiry within parliament, portfolio committees. But in the public sector, we've had sophisticated words of calling it irregularities, collusion. You know, there isn't nepotism or favoritism. It's something else. That we're not dealing with that particular aspect of corruption in the sector.
Here's another thing that you do raise a correct point to say that we actually need a policy reform, especially within how we invest our money in South Africa. Remember that PIC holds 1.9 trillion rand in immovable assets, and that money that they have that they can invest on, that belongs to them. And we've been saying that how the PIC actually selects its investment is very biased towards these big companies, and the due diligence that they inherently make on these companies is not the same as, for instance, your state-owned enterprises. When, for instance, it was suggested, it was not even something that was factual, that state-owned enterprises wanted to borrow from PIC, which actually, being a state-owned investment company, should look out for state-owned enterprises because it's in the benefit of the fiscus and in turn the greater South African populace that state-owned enterprises are functional. But they apply very stringent investment measures when it comes to that. But they don't do due diligence on Steinhoff, on all these other entities that now have been shown to present false statements. I mean, where were they when they were given statements that there was something wrong with them? I mean, people have come out and say from 2009 already, people picked up that there's something untoward about these financial reports and financial statements that Steinhoff was filing. And that is before they actually went and listed in Frankfurt, because they actually left and went and listed in Frankfurt. But before then, already, there were red flags that were coming up. Where was PIC then, having invested billions of rands, and now that it will probably have to write off because Steinhoff has dropped dramatically in share price, and some of the assets might be seized by international class action suits where it has preferential shares. And in future, we need to know that PIC has to reform its policy, and even the government, in dealing with private sector corruption, has to change its stern hand.
Yeah, and we know that with the undue influence that private sector has, and who sits on the board or which particular executive signs the checks or the deals, is also something that is worrisome, because it then means that essentially it's an extension of whichever company would be getting government contracts. You know, the state of capture terms of reference also have 2 points that suggest that we need to have a broader investigation, which some are saying we simply don't have the time for it. I mean, when then is there an ideal time to look at all of this corruption?
We always maintain the position that the ruling party, which is the African National Congress today, has inherited an untransformed state. That's why they can't deal with corruption 24 years into democracy. What corruption means in South Africa is to be black, is to be corruption. The face of the president comes in your mind. It's black. It's absolutely not white, because we have no agenda to transform this society and finally put measures into place for us to see that South Africa is a black country, right? White corruption is a norm in South Africa. You know, I think about Christo Visi, who is associated with Steinhoff, right? Which, as early as 2010, for example, this man was caught in an airport, I think it's Heathrow, if I'm not mistaken, with an amount that equals to about 14 million rand, right, in cash. And that money was frozen, and it was eventually handed back to him, right? And that's corruption. That's moving money, in fact, out of the country illegally, right? Because SARS has no way in regulating that money, but he got away with it. It doesn't even stop there. He even comes out and says, this is money that I have gained through diamond dealings during the 1980s and the 1990s. This is an era of apartheid in South Africa. This is an era where corruption was normalized, and we are unable, as the government in this country, to prosecute these people.
Yeah.
So that's why the Commission on State Capture is very important, to say, finally, we must have the balls as the country to deal with all kinds of corruption, and there is no way that we are going to you are going to tell us that you are dealing with corruption and absolve white monopoly capital and absolve Johan Rupert, absolve Kosbecker, Oppenheimer's, the list goes on.
Yeah, but just in closing, Amgela, that this is, especially with the call of multiple probes, both in South Africa and in the UK, around Steinhoff, that the voluminous call for investigation is not just something that is unique to South Africa. There's a vested interest globally that something hopefully will come out, and the corrective action being taken.
Well, it seems that Germany, Netherlands and the UK are taking far more stringent action than we are in South Africa, because the NPA, I haven't heard what they're actually going to institute in South Africa, whereas the prosecution authorities of the countries that I've just mentioned have actually taken a hand to say, you know what, we are going to take Steinhoff to task for actually defrauding our public, coming to our stock exchange and fraudulently listing doctored figures and doctored financial statements. We in South Africa, we just hear that they are going to sell off these assets to try and recoup. They are rebuilding. The JSE CEO just comes out and says this and that about boards must have more oversight in terms of making sure that this Steinhoff issue is not repeated again. But what are the stringent matters? Why isn't JSE saying that, okay, you violated codes of financial reporting, you violated King 3 or King 3 that has been in place, you violated IFRS, you violated all these financial laws. Why isn't SARS coming up and saying, okay, this is a problem that you defrauded the country of tax money, you were involved in illicit financial flows, and these are a very big problem in Africa, because the Global Financial Integrity has come out and said that actually illicit financial flows take about 40% of the development money that is due in Africa. So you have a criminal network that we are actually normalizing. And in fact, the media, or the so-called mainstream media, is in cahoots with it, because they are not chaperoning it and holding these people accountable as they will do when, for instance, Matela Kuku does something at Eskom. And when you compare the figures, the corruption that we claim at Eskom, the corruption that happens in the private sector, you have a 10-to-1 factor, but the coverage is so minimal that it's not even funny.
Okay, those are, of course, questions one would hope that the collective class action will be able to answer, but we're going to have to leave it there with our panelists. As always, good to have you. We had Zanele Lwane, Deputy President of Black First and Land First, and Yamkela Spengane, Black Consciousness Political Activist. And you at home, thanks so much for joining us.